Hey, so to conclude chapter 6, I want to talk about a couple things. We're going to first introduce calcium homeostasis to you because calcium plays such an important role in creating bone. We need to talk a little bit about calcium. And then I'm going to wrap up the PowerPoint talking about some final things, some disorders and broken bones. But let's get into the calcium regulation right away here. And we all know that calcium is an important part of bones. You know, your mom, when you were a kid, told you to drink your milk because it will build strong bones and that kind of thing. Our body needs a certain amount of calcium. And so we have to have calcium homeostasis. Now, on our PowerPoint, if you look on slide number 13, you'll see this picture. I'm just going to jump right into our handout because the handout explains this, I think, a lot better. So I'm going to jump into our handout and let's talk about calcium homeostasis, calcium regulation. Now, the first thing that I want to stress is that calcium is needed in our body for more than just building bone. All right, we need calcium. And in green here, I wrote in order of importance the three main things that calcium does in our body. And bone is actually number 3 on the list. So the most important thing that calcium does in our body is it allows our muscles to contract. Now, when we get to chapter 10, we'll learn how calcium does this. But calcium is going to be responsible for muscle contraction. Now, I have that as number 1 because, you know, your heart's a muscle. Your heart has to contract. Doesn't matter how strong your bones are if your heart's not working right. So the number 1 thing that calcium does is helps contract muscle. It's also involved in blood clotting. So when we get to chapter 19, I believe, we will see that calcium is needed for blood clotting. And that is a little more important than bone matrix also. You know, can't clot blood, you bleed out. Doesn't matter how strong your bones are, right? And then, of course, our third thing is the bone matrix, which is what we're talking about today. So we need calcium to build a strong bone matrix to make our bones strong. Now, as you guessed, there are hormones that are going to be regulating our calcium. And so there are 2 hormones. The first one's called calcitonin. Sorry, my page got cut off, so I had to add that in. So it's calcitonin. And then the second hormone is called parathyroid hormone. Now, calcitonin is made in your thyroid gland. So your thyroid gland makes not just thyroid hormones, but it's got these specialized cells called parafollicular cells that produce calcitonin. So what I want to do is I want to go over calcitonin first, and then we'll talk about this other hormone that's a regulator, parathyroid hormone. So calcitonin is going to be released by our thyroid, and it's going to travel through our bloodstream from the thyroid gland to your bones, and it's going to stimulate osteoblasts. And then osteoblasts are going to build bone. Now, what you need to think of when you think of this process is that calcitonin is not directly affecting calcium. It's indirectly affecting calcium levels, because what it does is it stimulates these osteoblasts. Now, remember from the beginning of this chapter what osteoblasts do. Osteoblasts build bone. So what they're going to do is, in order to build bone, osteoblasts have to take calcium out of your bloodstream and add it into the bone. So if we need, a certain amount of calcium in our blood, if we have more calcium in our blood than we need, we're going to trigger calcitonin. The release of calcitonin is going to cause the stimulation of osteoblasts, and osteoblasts are going to take that calcium that's extra in your bloodstream and put it into your bones as a bone builder. All right? So this is a way to remove the calcium from your bloodstream. That's what calcitonin does. All right? So down here at the bottom, I'm going to expose all of my parathyroid hormone, which I don't want to do right at the moment. But down here at the bottom, see, I have this pathetic kind of line here that's supposed to represent a blood vessel. So if this is the bloodstream, calcium is going to be removed from the blood by the osteoblasts and added into the bone. All right? So this calcitonin is going to be used when we have excess calcium in our bloodstream. Now, the second hormone, parathyroid hormone's going to do the opposite. All right? Now, the first thing that it does is parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate osteoclasts. Now, osteoclasts break down bone, right? So if we don't have enough calcium in our bloodstream, parathyroid hormone is going to signal osteoclasts to break down bone. And as the osteoclasts break down bone, the calcium is then shipped into your bloodstream. So it says osteoclasts are going to remove calcium from the bone and add it to our blood. All right? Now, if this was a perfect world, we'd have this nice balance here, right? Where we have calcitonin taking calcium out of our bloodstream, adding it into bone, and then we'd have equal amounts of osteoclasts breaking down bone and putting calcium back into our bloodstream. The problem is we've got these other processes. We've got to contract muscles, we've got to clot blood, so we're constantly using up calcium. And so we need to add more calcium into our body. Well, we can do that through our diet, right? So another thing that parathyroid hormone does is it's going to signal our kidneys to not dump calcium out in our urine. So we can reabsorb the calcium, send it back to the bloodstream. This is going to keep calcium in our blood. So if we're low on calcium, parathyroid hormone is going to stimulate osteoblasts to break down bone, ship calcium to our bloodstream. We're also going to signal the kidneys to not pee out calcium, to keep it in our bloodstream. And then parathyroid hormone has one other effect where it's going to signal the intestines to absorb more vitamin D, because vitamin D is required to absorb calcium. So calcium cannot be absorbed by our body without vitamin D. So we're going to stimulate the absorption of more vitamin D, which allows the intestines to absorb and add more calcium back to our blood. What's interesting about this vitamin D thing is this is why milk is fortified with vitamin D. If you go to the grocery store, just look at your half gallon of milk the next time you buy it. It'll say, 2% milk fortified with vitamin D. What they do is they actually add vitamin D to the milk. It's an additive. They add it to the milk so that your body can absorb the calcium that's in the milk better. You see, if you don't have that vitamin D, you're not going to absorb the calcium. It'll pass right through you and you'll poop it out. So you have to have vitamin D. If you are taking a vitamin and you want to take a vitamin that has calcium, make sure that vitamin is also containing vitamin D, because you're just wasting all that calcium if it doesn't have vitamin D. You need it for absorption. So we constantly need to be bringing in more calcium because we're using it for those three things. But this is how we're going to regulate our calcium blood levels. So if we have too much calcium, we're going to ship it to our bones. If we don't have enough calcium, we're going to take it from our bones, ship it into the bloodstream, and then try and collect as much calcium from our kidneys and from our diet as we can to keep these levels high. Why do we need the levels a certain amount? To contract our muscles, to clot our blood. Okay, so if we look at our PowerPoint, the end of the PowerPoint just mentions some of the effects of aging. Osteoporosis is one of those things where we decrease our bone matrix, we decrease our bone mass, we increase our likelihood of fractures. We can, have a stooping posture, lose height, pain, stiffness, loss of teeth. All of these things are just effects of aging and our body not being able to regulate bones as well as it once did. Osteoporosis, it says that we start losing bone mass at around age 35 and it just keeps progressing. That's a little depressing, but this is why it's important to keep exercising. It keeps building bones and muscles. Because of estrogen loss, women are more prone to osteoporosis. Women that are older can lose up to half of their bone mass. And that's because they don't have the estrogen levels anymore to maintain healthy bones. Men are not as susceptible, but we still have issues. Men can lose up to a quarter of their bone mass, and that's because men slowly start dropping testosterone levels as they get older. And in men, testosterone is playing a big role in bone health. Other things that could cause osteoporosis is the lack of absorption of calcium or vitamin D. This can happen with young people. You don't really think of osteoporosis as being a young person disease, but let's take, for example, someone who is an anorexic. People suffering from anorexia may have calcium deficiencies, or, if a person is malnourished, they live in a place where there's a famine, something like that. The lack of calcium can cause osteoporosis. So even though it is typically an older person's disease, it can, under certain circumstances, affect younger people as well. There are certain medications that can interfere with the intake of calcium that can further develop osteoporosis. Of course, a lack of exercise, you need weight-bearing exercises, weightlifting, that kind of thing, to keep those bones healthy. The way that they determine osteoporosis is looking at a family history, doing an X-ray, a bone mineral density test. You've probably seen some drugs that help with osteoporosis, like I remember this one, I haven't seen it advertised in a while, but there's one called Boniva. And what Boniva does is it inhibits osteoclasts and tries to stimulate osteoblasts so that'll build bone. And then a lot of women after menopause go into estrogen therapy because estrogen levels can help keep bones healthy. So here's just an example of osteoporosis. It's a lack or a decrease in the bone matrix. So healthy bone versus osteoporosis on this slide. All right, to end our chapter, just mentioning some bone fractures, just some terminology here. No big deal. You've probably heard of these. An open fracture, aka a compound fracture, is where you break a bone and it's sticking out of your skin. Closed fracture is also called a simple fracture. That's where you break your bone, but it's not protruding out of the skin. Green stick fracture is an incomplete fracture. Kind of like imagine trying to break a really green stick. You know how it fractures on the convex side as you bend it, but it does not break all the way through. That's what we would call a green stick fracture. And then probably the most serious of fractures is the comminuted fracture, where the bone fragments into many pieces. You know, an impact injury, someone falling off of a bridge or something like that could have a comminuted fracture as they land, and the bone cannot take that stress. All right, everyone. So this is going to wrap up chapter 6, and we're going to move into chapters 7 and 8, which actually is a lot shorter. And so get ready for that next. I hope everyone's having a good day. Take care. I'll see you soon.